Resting on the bank of beautiful Lake Tekapo on the southern island of New Zealand sits the Church of the Good Shepherd. We're currently in beautiful Lake Tekapo in the South Island of New Zealand. Behind me is the Church of the Good Shepherd, part of a black sky reserve. We're actually around this church filming a future release where we're going to teach you guys how to shoot the night sky, capture star trails, and the Milky Way. But for now, we're still working on picking up those iconic New Zealand landscapes. Up until this point, I've been using almost entirely wide-angle perspectives and wide-angle lenses. So today, we're gonna do something a little bit different. So behind me, as I said, is the Church of the Good Shepherd. I was just there earlier, really close to the church at a wide angle, and take a look at this shot. So in this shot, you can see that the church is definitely the main subject. It's a beautiful old stone building, but the mountains in the background are so far away that they seem minuscule and insignificant. So I want to change that a little bit. So I've decided to get a little bit further back so that I could change the perspective and have the church be framed by big mountains behind it. But here's the issue. When I get this far away from the church, my wide angles don't work anymore. I'm too far away to get a good shot. So take a look at what 16 millimeters looks like, and now 35 millimeters. So the lens I've been using the most is the 16 to 35, and as you can see, it's not getting the job done in this situation. So looking at these two shots at wide angle, you can see that there's really nothing interesting going on here. My vision for this shot is much different. What I want to do is frame up the house with giant mountains behind it. I want them to feel like they're a part of this huge rolling landscape. From this far back, there's too much in the perspective, and really close up to the church as well, the church is way too large and the mountains are spread out. So standing back here gives me a better compression on the scene. And I'm gonna talk a little bit about what compression is. When I showed you that shot where I was right up against the church and I was shooting the church at a wide angle perspective will spread the scene out. So if you have large mountains in the background and you shoot at 14 millimeter, everything in the foreground will be really large, everything in the background will get really, really small because that millimeter will spread everything out. The more you zoom into something, the more it compresses things together and makes them look like they're on the same plane rather than far back in perspective. So for this shot, I distanced myself far away from the church so I could stand back with the telephoto lens and compress the church against the big mountains. Since the wide angles weren't working at all, I decided to put the 70 to 200 on the camera. Now take a look at a couple different versions of this. Take a look at what 70 millimeters looks like. That's starting to look a little bit better, but I want to crop in even more. Let's go all the way to 200 millimeter. It looks pretty cool, but I feel like it's zoomed a little bit too far in. I'd still like to see the extent of the mountains right now. I still have a little bit of sky. I have the mountains and the church, but I'd like to see more of the mountains extend to the left so I can tell how long this mountain range actually is. So check out 135 millimeter. I think this is the best of both worlds. We see the church as the main subject, but it rolls into the mountains and we have a nice part of the sky and the nice green grass of the church. I think everything's solid at 135. So we've talked a little bit about parallax and how objects move at different speeds relative to your position. So things will start to move faster in the foreground and slower in the background, and as you change your position, those elements will change your shot dramatically. When you zoom in with telephoto, that's even more dramatic. Slight variations from the left to right are going to move your objects very quickly. So I've set up a shot where I really like the composition of the church in the V of the mountain. So the mountain on the left comes into the left side of the church and then sort of comes out the top of the church on the right side. I really like that composition, but let's take a look at what happens if I move just a little bit to the left and a little bit to the right. So moving over to this side, immediately the biggest problem is it pushes that big camper van more to the left, so now I can't frame the composition that I want without having half of a camper van in the shot. So that's kind of a deal breaker for me. I don't know if they're gonna leave or stay there the whole time, but either way, that's sort of front row parking space. So even if that one leaves, another car is gonna end up being there. So I'm gonna try the other side. On this side, it looks a little better than the other side. I don't see any of the cars in the parking lot, but I don't really like the way that the mountains are anymore. I really like having the church in the middle. So one mountain leads into one side of the church, the other one leads out the other side. This isn't a bad shot, but I think I can do better by finding a happy medium. This shot is also a little different than what we've done before because it's using the late afternoon light rather than the sunset. The sun is setting right directly in front of me here, which means that it's casting golden light on that church. In another 10 minutes, it's going to be low enough in the sky to still give even lighting on everything behind it, but not too low to start casting shadows. So that's exactly what I want. So it's not exactly the golden hour, it's right on the edge approaching golden hour. So I have nice, beautiful, even light distributed in this scene. Since the lighting is completely consistent, it's a little filtered behind some soft clouds, everything looks really good and really solid. I'm actually able to get this in one exposure. There's no need for bracketing, and this is pretty much going to be a straight out of camera, minimal adjustment kind of shot. So with everything set up and ready to go, and with as much of humanity hidden from this shot as possible, I still have tons of tourists walking around the church. So once I have everything set up and locked down, I'm going to take a series of exposures every 30 seconds or so as the people move around. So the hope is to take multiple of the same exposure, not exposure bracketing like we've been doing before, but the same exposure over time in consistent lighting. So as those people move in Photoshop, I can use sections of each exposure to get a clean image. My hope is that if I take enough exposures, hopefully no more than 10, but if I have to, I will, that I'll be able to get enough clean spots of the image with no people, that I have enough layers in Photoshop to blend all that in and quickly and easily mask out the people. And that'll make it look like it's just in the middle of nowhere and it's not a heavily visited tourist spot. Keep in mind that I'm not trying to get a perfect shot with no people in it, because that's impossible. People visit this all day and all night. All I'm trying to do is get enough clean spots. So if there's a group of people on the right side of the image, I'll wait for that spot to be clear and they move to the left, I'll take another shot, and then I'll wait for the people to move from the left, take another shot so I have another clear shot. It's just so that I have enough of the same spots clear and without people so I can blend them together. It sounds a little bit complicated, but it's actually quite simple in post-processing. Once we have all the layers, I'm going to walk you through it step by step. While I traditionally work with very wide angles with my landscape photography, a telephoto shot comes in handy every once in a while. Now, I actually don't travel with the 70-200 f2.8 because it's extremely heavy. I have used the f4 version many times for wildlife because it's half the weight of this one. It works really well. I actually travel with a smaller Fujifilm telephoto lens because it's much smaller and much easier to pack and lightweight in the travel gear. So just to close it up here, as I was talking, the light changed dramatically. So remember I said that this was really a late afternoon, just into golden hour shot. Now I'm glad that I figured that out, because as I was shooting, when we got into the golden hour, I started to get really bad shadow crawl from these trees up on this ridge that you can't see. Once the shadows started entering my scene, it was done shooting. So if I would have gotten here for the normal golden hour, I would have already been too late because there would have been heavy shadows in the scene. I think I got 6 or 7 good shots with the people moving around. It's going to be almost enough to remove the people in Photoshop, but I think there's still going to be a little bit of cleanup to do. So if there's still people in the shot, we'll go through what I talked about using the multiple frames, and then at the end, we'll clone them out using the rubber stamp tool. So the next step is to go into Photoshop, see if I can blend some of those frames together, and then remove any of the people that are left over. Welcome back to the studio. Lesson 10, New Zealand, Church of the Good Shepherd. And if you remember, if you watched the video portion, the live action portion of this, I was talking about wide angle versus telephoto. And then once I established the shot of the telephoto, I talked about how there were just tons of people, there was a camper van that influenced my composition, and there were just people moving around everywhere. Well, we've already learned how to remove Lee and Patrick and a bunch of other random people and just different things to get rid of signs of life. But what if you don't want to do all that painting? Well, thankfully Photoshop has a statistics mode, and by running statistics with a few options set, we can actually use a series of images shot at the same time, the same composition and focal length, and Photoshop will go in and figure out things that are moving and get rid of those things that are moving and try to replace it with the background. So hopefully, if all goes right, it'll get rid of all the people that are walking around. But before we do that, we have to take a look at Lightroom again, and we have to figure out what we're working with here and make our adjustments. So let's start that now. If you open up this lesson in Lightroom, you'll notice that there are 5 files. And if I just roll through these, they're all shot at the same settings. They're all shot at 150 millimeter, and you can see that people keep moving. They just keep moving. So if these people say, this guy's right here, right now, if I move to the next one, he's gone. This lady's taking a photo. If I move, she's gone. All of these people over here, they're gone. So there's going to be pieces of frames where the people are in the frame and when they're out. And Photoshop is going to do its job and try to remove everything. The only thing I can anticipate being a problem is check out this guy right here. She's just sitting right there. She's not moving at all. So we're probably going to have a weird result. But that would be 98% of everything that's going to be resolved. So before we do that, though, I just want to point a couple things out here in inside of Lightroom. And the first thing you might notice, if I go over to the Develop panel here, I have not set anything here, the exposure, contrast, nothing. Look how dull and flat this image is. In fact, look at the histogram. We're missing almost 20% of each side. Look at that. That's almost 30% of the highlights. So if I turn the contrast way up, almost all the way, now I'm starting to get the complete tonality of the histogram. That's just unacceptable. You're going to notice this when you're shooting extreme telephotos and landscapes. Sometimes things just aren't as vivid. Even if you have the camera turned to vivid mode, when you get these raws in, they're going to be flat. And they're going to be flatter the more you telephoto in, and you're going to require a little bit more color correction and finesse. So before I get into this, I want to teach you guys something new. We can control how Lightroom processes our raw files, and that's actually going to be all the way down on the bottom here. It's called camera calibration. So 99 out of 100 times that I use photos in Lightroom, I leave it to the default, which is camera flat. But if I change this, I can change it to different modes. Watch what happens if I click camera landscape. Now it's going to be super saturated, almost like what I did with the contrast, but I'm still not happy with it. I can actually go through, obviously not monochrome, neutral, or even portrait, standard, or vivid. And there's some different modes that I can use. And this will redistribute the way that it's interpreting these raw files. So remember, Lightroom is a raw engine. So it's bringing in the raw files from the camera, every raw file being different, and then it's going to interpret them for you. Some people love the way that Lightroom does it by default. Some people like other pieces of software too. And there are many different ones that do different things. But here, this is a really quick way that we can change it. Just from camera flat to camera neutral, you can see that now we're getting the tonality back. So it added some of that saturation, added some of those values back in. So we're going to need to do less to get more out of this image. Now again, in the last lesson, I showed you guys dehaze. Let's add some more dehaze to hopefully pop in some of that mountainscape. And you can see just by adding a little bit of dehaze, I'll say 25% dehaze, starting to get some of the mountainscape back there. So this is already starting to come to life. I also want to make sure that this is always enabled. Profile corrections, remove chromatic aberrations. I usually take the sharpening down. In this case, I'm just going to leave it at its default 25%. Again, that's up to you. Now we have a little bit of fun. We can change the exposure a little bit. May want to bring the exposure up just a hair and pull the highlights back down to get the clouds back. And you know what, maybe push the shadows just a little bit, just to get this exactly the way that I want it. Maybe a hair of vibrance and a tiny bit more contrast. Now I've done a bunch of stuff to this raw file. I want every raw file to be the same. So what I'm going to do with this selected, I'm going to select the rest of the files and I'm going to right click under Develop Settings. Instead of copy and paste, I'm going to say Sync Settings. That's going to take the one that's selected, apply everything to the other ones. So we've changed basic tone, we've changed the calibration, we've changed the process. Process version should always stay the same, lens corrections, and then we should be able to find under Effects, you can turn these off and just say Dehaze. And I also changed the vibrance. So we'll go ahead and say Synchronize, and now it's going to go ahead and synchronize all of these files to be consistent. And this is very important that they're mostly consistent when we go into Photoshop. Because Photoshop's actually going to draw the data out, figure out what moves, and it figures out what stays the same. So this is going to be a little bit different. I'm not actually going to bring these into Photoshop. What I'm going to do is export them to their own folder. So we're going to say Export, and I'm going to change this from PSD, I'm going to select TIFFs. Now, if this was a portfolio piece, then I'd have it TIFF. I wouldn't resize it. I'd have it at 16 bits. But for the sake of demonstration, because this can get really, really cumbersome because it's having to do a lot of math on big files, let's go ahead and resize them to 3,000 pixels at 300 DPI. The next thing I need to do is go ahead and create a new folder, and I'm just going to call that image stack, and we're going to call it Church of the Good Shepherd. And I'll create that. Choose that folder, and we'll go ahead and export all 5 of those. I'm not going to open them into Photoshop when I'm done. I'm just going to export them out. Files have been exported. Now let's switch over to Photoshop. It's going to be a little bit different. I'm going to go up to File, and there's going to be a few things that we can do. Under Scripts, this is where we can load those files back into a stack, or we can run statistics. Now, statistics has many different modes for many different things. We're going to use median. So remember to use median for object removal. We're going to browse. My recent folder here should be that one that I created. I'm going to select all of the images and say OK. I don't have to align them. I know that they were already in place. If there's some pixel shift, if you try to do this handheld, make sure to try to automatically align everything. But since I was using the rock solid tripod, everything should be OK. As soon as I click OK, it's going to run through the math process. All right, so that's the process, and you can see here that I don't have very many people. But as a reference, we need to go ahead and open one of these files. Let's go ahead and open up the last one, the 5th one. I'm going to open that up, and I'm going to bring that back in so we have it as a reference. So you can see what we had before and now after. So there's not a whole lot going on there. It got rid of all those people from all the different spots. But just like I predicted here, we have this person. This person decided to not move at all. So we're still going to have to do a little bit of cloning cleanup. And in this case, I can even get rid of that entire rock that she's sitting on. That's no problem at all. I can just go ahead and remove that entire thing here. I'm going to change the brush, make it a little bit harder here, make it a little bit smaller, and I'm going to go ahead and paint in part of the church. This is so far away that nobody's really going to notice if you repeat some of these tiles. Really no big deal at all. Again, down here on the bottom, just grab some grass somewhere here, and you just paint that out completely. Maybe some of this path if you want to be close to a perfectionist here. And let's just go over and let's see, because I know that we got rid of a lot of the stuff, but you can see here what happened. There were some people here, and it missed a little bit, which really isn't that big of a deal. We can always just grab a piece of the background here and fix it. And we'll just jump over to this other side here and just see if there was any other problems. Not too many problems at all. There's something right about here which is a little bit funny. So we'll just go ahead and clean that guy up a little bit. It was around on the tree there. No problem. There's another thing that happens all the time here. There's some garbage. Let's get rid of that. And I'll just get rid of some garbage. I'm not going to spend too much time getting rid of everything here. Other things you might want to get rid of, this sign here, this garbage can here, maybe some of the posts, different things. Let's take a look at this image again. Go ahead and load it here. Now look at the sky. I want to point out what it's done too. Since there was motion in the sky, it's actually created this weird sky. I have all these crazy pieces here. It's also averaged the fog out a little bit and removed pieces that were moving. I don't really like that. So what I'm going to do is use a portion of the original image. So I'm going to go ahead and create a mask and a very easy gradient. So I'm going to use the top portion of this image just about to here. So basically now I have the original image on top. Same thing, I don't know if you guys notice here, if I turn this mask off, pay attention to the foreground. Notice the lighting changes a little bit here. I may also want to use some of the original exposure down here. And again, that's just going to get rid of any problems where some grass blades moved or anything changed a little bit and where statistics has gone in and possibly removed things that shouldn't have been removed. But either way, that's pretty much everything. This created sort of a smart linked layer, so if I double click on this stack, it'll open it up in a new PSD where I can edit those 5 layers that I brought in. I don't want to do that. I want to flatten it out, and to do that, I'm actually going to right click and I'm going to pick rasterize layer. Rasterizing layer will just get rid of that, bake it all into one layer, and we're pretty much good. So that was an easy way to get rid of things. If you have time and the lighting's static, nothing's changing, it's always a good thing to do. You can actually just fire off maybe 5 or 10 exposures over the course of maybe even 5 or 10 minutes. And just pay attention when you're shooting that objects that were covered by people are then not covered by people, take a shot, wait a little while, take a shot, run it through statistics, and you can save yourself a lot of time cloning. Personally, I love to clone. I don't know why. It's soothing for some reason because it takes hours. There's a rhythm in it. But if you guys want to use this method, you could probably apply it to a lot of the situations we've shot before. Even like Skogafoss, we had to remove the people from the waterfall. If I would have shot a couple more different shots, they would have moved and I probably wouldn't have had to do all that work. So this is a really good technique to know. From here, the scene itself is not really a portfolio piece. It's pretty, but I wanted to demonstrate telephoto and this nice object removal with statistics. But if we were going to do something, I'd bring it into Color Effects Pro as usual, and I'd add more contrast and some different things. So I'm just going to go ahead and do that really quick, but we're not going to spend a lot of time on this one because this portion is going to be pretty repetitive. The dehaze filter took care of a lot of the problems here, but I probably still want to bump the contrast just a little bit. I'm not going to go too far on this. It's not that interesting of an image. It's nice, but it's not really a portfolio piece. It's just a nice bonus shot. There's some cool pooling fog in that mountainscape, which I kind of like. But really, I want to bump the clouds up a little bit. That's what I really want to work on. So if I go to tonal contrast, let's just go ahead and add something. Let's actually go a little rough on this. Let's do 15, 15, and 5. I'll turn this on and off here. You can see those clouds start to pop into existence, which is great. And I'll just go ahead and lock this down here. So I'm going to go ahead and create some selection points for the sky. Very nice, very easy tonal contrast for the sky and part of the mountain. And I'm just going to say OK. Now obviously at this point you can do whatever you want to this. It might even make a really nice black and white image. You could crop it a little bit. You could add some more color, monotone sepia. It looks pretty classic. It's, you know, really the first time we've looked at structures in landscape photography, but again, it was just for demonstration purposes on how to shoot telephoto and compose those shots and to remove people with multiple shots. So the only thing really here to do for me, the last thing I'm going to do is just put a curves layer on. And you can see that I'm missing, it's still low contrast, so if I just pull this to the left, the highlights, then I can go ahead and bring those values to something a little bit better. Again, one more thing that I could do here, I'll go ahead and duplicate this, would obviously be go ahead and add sharpening, and that would just be a high pass filter. But other than that, this file, as far as I'm concerned, is pretty complete. And I was able to teach you guys how to remove people without relying too much on the clone stamp and just some more in-camera tricks with Photoshop statistics. And that wraps it up for Lesson 10, wide versus telephoto and removing multiple objects using the statistics set to median in Photoshop. Next time I see you guys in post, we're going to be talking about focus stacking. So the next lesson, you're going to learn how to shoot for focus stacking, and then in Photoshop, we're going to learn how to blend the different focus points and focus planes together seamlessly.